You are privy to some real life stuff that you think would be great in a screenplay or a TV series, an interaction from your job, a news article, a real life story of someone you know. It doesn't matter. The problem is you don't have the rights. So what are you to do? Well, one option is you can try to get the rights. If it's a friend or someone you know, you can probably get them for little to no cost, or at least deferred payment if it ever gets shot and released. But what if you can't do that? Well, there is a path forward, but it requires some ingenuity on your part and paying attention to the parts that matter, and I'm going to give you a couple of tips to help you out. First thing, and I have to say this for every video related to legal things, I am not a lawyer and I don't even play one on TV. If you are using real life things in any shape, form, or fashion, you should run it by a lawyer familiar with entertainment law. It's better to spend some money on a lawyer than lose your shirt later because you didn't do any due diligence and you overlooked something, so be smart. The film industry is a business and you can rest assured that they will do their due diligence, so you have to do yours. If you're wanting to be a professional screenwriter, you gotta act like one, get your act together, and that's critically important when it comes to real life stuff. But if you found something in real life and you think it'd make a great screenplay, what do you do? Well, if the people involved have been dead for more than 100 years, you're fine in most cases. Still check with a lawyer, but you're probably good to go. But if it's more recent, okay, now you're probably gonna have to jump through some legal hoops or just get a little more creative. So there's three other things that you can do. One, get the rights. This is a viable option in some cases, and by get the rights, I mean you are seeking out and obtaining either the life rights of the key individual or individuals involved, or you are getting the rights to an article or book that was written about the key individual or individuals. Either one of those usually gets you the permissions you need and gives you some good leverage when you try to market your script. Now, getting the rights can be a challenge. Sometimes it isn't cheap, but it can be done and is a viable option in some cases. So this one might be worth exploring. Don't just dismiss it out of hand, especially if you want to try and stay close to the source material. But if you're willing to be a little more creative, try one of these other two options. Number two, use the bones but change the setting. Using the bones means that you use the general beats of the real life story, but you change them in some way so they don't feel as familiar. So if, for example, you want to tell a story about people trapped in a mine, maybe you change it to people trapped in a bomb shelter after an earthquake. So you're changing some of the key pieces so it's not as recognizable as the real thing. But that also means that you need to change the names of the people and perhaps even the genders or roles of the people. So the main character in real life might be a male surgeon, but in your story, it's a female engineer. And what you're doing is you're obscuring the real facts, but keeping the core pieces of what happens. You'd need to modify those too, but you can change it up. When it comes to setting, the setting of a story is both the geography of the story and the time in which it takes place. So if your real story is a mine collapse in 2015 in Guatemala, make it a bomb shelter collapse in rural Kansas in 1953, or a space station breach in 2453. And yet the bones of the story are still there, but you need to change enough of them to make it different than the real life event, and you don't really want it to feel derivative. It'll feel similar perhaps, but it will definitely be something different. And again, it's always good to run something by a lawyer if you're just not sure. But if you change enough, you're going to be fine. But the definition of what is enough depends on the actual situation and how well known the real life story actually is. So for example, if you wanted to write a screenplay about someone who builds their own rocket ship and other people pay them a lot of money and they all go out into space to explore an old derelict spaceship, but the homemade rocket ship loses contact and there's a massive search and rescue operation, but no one can find the homemade ship in time before the air runs out and everyone on board dies tragically. And that's a story that's not gonna fly. I'm sorry, because it's still too similar to the tragedy that happened a few months ago with the essentially homemade submarine and the Titanic. So keeping the bones and modifying the setting are situational and depend greatly on how familiar people are with the actual events. In other words, the more obscure the real life story, the easier it's going to be to accomplish this one. And the third thing you can do, and probably honestly the best option of the three, is let it be an inspiration and a springboard for something new. Probably the best option is to take two real-life events and combine them into something new. The real-life events inspire elements of the same new story, but now, because you're blending two real-life events and adding some other stuff so it makes sense, you're essentially creating a new thing. Okay, musical artists, they do this all the time. It's called doing a remix, where they take something original and they merge and blend it with something new to create a whole new thing. The original is kind of recognizable, but the finished product is so different, it's actually a whole new thing. And honestly, this is a great way to come up with some new and seemingly original ideas for screenplays and TV shows, because you're blending things that people like individually. They like this one, and you're taking them and blending them into something new because they already like the pieces that you're making. So now you're merging them, you're making a new thing, and it can be very good if you can execute it. So don't be afraid to blend some real life stuff and make something new. And if you combine this one, number 3, with number 2, so not only are you combining things, you keep the bones and you're changing the setting, it's gonna feel like a new and fresh idea, even though you are remixing things that already exist. There's a quote attributed to Pablo Picasso, even though it's not clearly something that he said, but we're just going to go with it. Good artists borrow, great artists steal. Using existing things to make something new is not a new thing. So get creative, but make sure you're changing enough so you aren't infringing on any existing rights. Now, if you're curious about some other legal stuff, watch this. There are fun buttons plus some other links below that might be helpful to you, and when you tell a story that matters. See you later.